welcome to the channel again. Thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for commenting, liking, etc. But first and foremost, thank you, huge thank you to the sponsors of this channel, because it is really you that make it possible to continue these videos, and frankly it is for you that I'm recording them. So thank you very, very, very much indeed. I really appreciate your generosity, your kindness, and the time that you spend watching the videos. Thank you. Sometimes we are in more than one mind what we're to record here. And the director, producer, editor of these videos, and the protagonist, hopefully that would be me, are not always in full agreement. As all married men out there would know, that means that I regularly lose the argument. Today is one of these days. I have been asked to speak about the standing rigging on this vessel, despite the fact that I would imagine that most of the viewers actually are perfectly well aware of the details of the standing rigging. And if this sounds to you like me trying to avoid responsibility for the video, you are absolutely right. This is you have read me correctly. This is exactly what I'm doing. I'm passing the buck. I am passing the guilt to somebody else. In other words, I'm practicing to become a politician. And boy, am I going to be good at that. Having said this, I have been asked to address some specific things about the rigging that may not be immediately obvious, and that really you have to go to the original sources to find, and not many of the secondary sources describe it in detail. First of all, as is usually the case, your primary sources. That would be the young officer's sheet anchor and the ever-dominant, ever-important steel. We are blessed that we have these two sources for the later periods. That is to say, they apply really roughly from approximately the American Revolutionary War onwards, when the rigging achieved its final version and form. After the American Revolutionary War, the drivers, the spankers, were moved to a boom rather than being sheeted boomless to a horse at the stern and the taffrail of the vessels. And of course, at the beginning of the American Revolutionary War, on the larger ships, we still have lateen yards, particularly on first rates, second rates, but in the process of the war, they disappear and they move to the much more manageable gaff rig. And in this context, as always, smaller vessels tended to move faster and to make the jump ahead of the larger ships. Let's not forget that three-deckers continue to carry spritzel topmasts way longer than any of the other vessels. Into the 1720s, we can see references to spritzel top masts on first and second rates even. Why exactly larger vessels were always more conservative is an interesting, debatable point, but it seems to be consistent throughout the development of the sailing navy. And I wish I could give a straight and good answer why this is the case. Is it that it is too damn expensive to carry out experiments? And if it has been working for so many years, why change it before you're absolutely dead sure that the new system is working too? Possibly. Frequently, shipwrights and rigging are described as conservative and repeating things just because they were done before them. I think I have expressed this doubt of this philosophy in previous videos on this channel. I certainly regularly do it in class. Nothing of what I have seen in the record historical, archaeological record suggests to me that these people were conservative in the sense of refusing to accept new developments and sticking to old. They were sticking to things that were working, but they were perfectly open-minded and willing to experiment and to accept new ideas when these ideas seemed to be working. Perhaps we'll do a different video on conservatism versus experimentation in development of vessels. And admittedly, it will be more my understanding philosophy of what I see rather than necessarily documentary, thoroughly supported view. But returning to what I have been asked to talk about, that has been about the stays and how the stays are set up, how they were rigged. And for the way that you set up your rigging, your best source really is the young sea officer. Because this is a practical seaman who is suggesting the sequence in which you are passing the lines, the sequence in which you are setting up the rig, the mechanical ways that you're putting it together. The master shipwright on my starboard side, on my starboard quarter there, is opening up a salvo to participate in our conversation, right, Beer? Anyway, as far as the dimensions and terminology, of course, read steel. There are many, many different editions of steel, and in my humble opinion, the older the better. But then I'm an archaeologist, what else would I say? Add to this that I am extremely old by now. Of course, I would prefer the older sources. But one of the interesting and rarely seen, especially in more modern models, is the fact that the spring stay or preventer stay, these are two different words for exactly the same thing. This is the smaller, the thinner line that dubs the main stay. And of course, the same is true for the other mast, just it is so clearly visible here for the main mast. And because, as you are aware, the mainstay is the largest section line used in the standing rigging. Everything else is proportionate to it. The way you set it up, however, is that the spring or preventer stay is passed through the loop, through the collar of the mainstay. The collar of the preventer stay is passed through the collar of the mainstay, over the masthead, and lies on top of the collar of the mainstay. The logic behind it is that it is more easily replaceable this way. And the reason the lighter line is under it is because that one was used for setting up the mainstaysail. And this, of course, makes it impossible to snake the two stays together. Much of the snaking, there are sources that confirm that, at least upon occasion, the snaking was a temporary solution done during battle. I have seen references to this in logbooks, in contemporary logbooks. But for smaller vessels particularly, usually preference was given to the staysails. I'm not quite sure how frequently and how much the lower staysails were used, but certainly top staysails were frequently used. Again, this is something that we can learn from reading contemporary master's logs books, because there is specifically stated which sails, what is the wind state, what are the sea state, the weather conditions, and on what course the vessel is lying, what sails are set, and how the sails change. And this is one of the exceptionally great values of contemporary logbooks. Do I collect them? I claim the Fifth Amendment. Recuperating some of the most obvious points about standing rigging, since I do tend to drift around with other information, I have already been warned that severe punishment is awaiting me if I continue drifting, flogging around the fleet at the very least. The gratings are being rigged as we speak, and the bosun is combing the cat-o'-nine tails. So returning to the vessels, maybe at some point we should do a video on punishment in the Navy, because this is another massively misunderstood topic that props up in all sorts of nautical fiction scribes and films and all sorts of stuff like this. And probably we should discuss it at some point in the near future. Returning, however, to the rigging, the most obvious things about it, it is cable laid. The stay is cable laid, left twist. The second thing is the line is heavily tarred because it is supposed to last for a very long time supporting the rig. Unless it is damaged in battle, rigs could easily, properly treated, properly maintained, the lines could last up to 20 years. That is, of course, when you properly warm, parcel and serve the line. Vessels after the height of naval warfare, when the rigs were not regularly changed, certainly 20-25 years could be expected to last. And we have found in archaeological records shrouds in quite good condition, even down on the bottom. Returning to the specific case, the stay is warmed, the collar area is served also, and the mouse is there to prevent the loop from closing and tightening. That perhaps is worth another video at some point. Let me know if you want to hear anything more about it and how they're set up and in what direction they should be and what is the logic behind them. I'll leave it down, mention it down in the comments, and we'll go about doing one if you're interested in it. But really the most important, the most interesting part about it is how it is set up. The fact that it is passing through the collar of the mainstay, over the masthead, and the collar lies on top of the collar of the mainstay, but the spring stay itself is going under it. Also, as you can see, the mainstay goes all the way forward. The collar for the forward deadeye is passing around the bowsprit, while the spring stay is attached to the foremast, as there is less pressure on it. And this is repeated pretty much for all the other stays. The logical one, the forestay, where you can see already the staysail, and eventually mizzen. Thank you so much for watching. Comment, leave questions, we'll do our best to answer. Let me know what you think about any ideas that you may have about future videos. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time again. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for commenting. Thank you very, very much for liking. And most of all, my hat off in deep appreciation and gratitude to the generous sponsors of this channel. Thank you. Goodbye.